America's Protestant heritage.
Was America founded as a Protestant country?
Yes, it certainly was. And you don't have, when they went forward to sign, there was only one Roman Catholic there at that point in time. And as many people have pointed out, the population of early America was about 99% Protestant. Jews were almost unheard of, and Romanists too. And in fact, the early colonies, they tried to stop Roman Catholics from coming in. I saw that man on TV talking there one time, that O'Donnell fella. They said, they were even trying to stop us there early on from even coming into this country and all. He was railing against the Protestants there. Of course they did. They tried to stop the Jesuits from coming in too. But it failed because after a while, your people are not all Christian, like they were early on. I believe most of the early colonists that came there to what's Massachusetts now, they were all basically Christian people, truly Christian, not just a name. But as more people came, then you get people that are not. But the thing is, you have to, if you're a true believer, I believe, you have to contend earnestly for the faith once and for all, delivered not to the professors, not to the ministers, not to the teachers, but to the saints, the ordinary, everyday Christian. If he's a true believer, he must be a contender. Otherwise, he doesn't truly believe. If you believe in something, you're going to contend for it. Otherwise, you don't really count it as that important. And that's what happened.
In an article titled From Georgetown to Langley, the controversial connection between the prestigious university and the CIA, author Alan McLeod writes, "If you have ever wondered, where do America's spies come from? The answer is quite possibly the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. The school provides the backbone for the Central Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, State Department, and other organs of the national security state. With more than 24 ex-CIA officials among its teaching staff, the school tailors its courses towards producing the next generation of analysts, assassins, coup plotters, and economic hitmen. To this day, the national security state is filled with Georgetown graduates. This includes no less than 5 former CIA directors." To understand how the Jesuits achieved such influence, we must consider that not all those who are called Jesuits are necessarily priests. Many Jesuits operate in secret and often appear in a variety of professions in society.
Do all Jesuits appear to be priests?
Not at all. In fact, only a certain number end up as priests. There's so many filtration systems on the way to becoming a priest. Many of them are coadjutors, formed coadjutors. That's a type 2 class, second class. And that means they can either be spiritual coadjutors, which means they can hear confessions, but they can't go a whole lot beyond that. There's some things they can do, but most they cannot. And then there's the temporal coadjutors, and those are the ones you got to watch out for. They may be your janitor, they may be a librarian, college professor, public relations, any number of things. No SJ, nothing to tell you that they're actually Jesuits, but they're full Jesuits, just not priests.
I guess you can be educated by the Jesuits and consider yourself more or less a lay Jesuit. A man wrote to me, and he said his mother was a lay Jesuit, and he mentioned other people, like I'm a lay member of a church, where you wouldn't be the clergyman in the church, but you would be a member of it.
In a book called The Papal System, first published in the year 1872, 19th century minister William Cathcart writes on the history of the papacy and the Jesuits in particular. He says, a Jesuit might be a leading Protestant, a prominent politician, the wife of a cabinet officer, a servant in a family. Anything, anywhere. They are everywhere in every guise. Such claims about the secret spies and operatives of the order are not unique. Even John Adams, who often warned of Jesuit intrigues, in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, wrote the following. He said, I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. They have a general now in Russia, in correspondence with the Jesuits in the U.S., who are more numerous than everybody knows. Shall we not have swarms of them here, in the shape of printers, editors, writers, schoolmasters, etc.? If ever a congregation of men could merit eternal perdition, on earth and in hell, it is this company of Loyola. Nineteenth-century priest Charles Chineke warned that the Catholic bishops of America had a plan to take control of the U.S. government using covert methods.
Chineke reported that he was invited to go to a large meeting of priests in Buffalo, New York, in 1852. And at this meeting, he heard of a plan to mass Roman Catholics in the large cities of the United States, to take political control of the country and to make a way for the time when, as he said, not a single senator or member of Congress will be chosen if he be not submitted to our Holy Father, the Pope, and when Catholics will not only elect the president, but fill and command the armies, man the navies, and hold the keys to the public treasury. Well, currently, Roman Catholics hold all or almost all of the key positions of power in the United States. Catholics have been increasingly viewed by United States politicians as an influential bloc of voters to be courted. The Catholic magazine, The Tablet, declared back in 2003 that Catholics in America now represent the most important shifting demographic for the vote. Senator Joe Biden, a Roman Catholic, was picked by Barack Obama to be his 2008 running mate, in part because of Biden's connection with Catholic voters. And of course, now Biden is the president.
To understand how Rome and the Jesuits gained the upper hand in the American deep state, we must study the foundations of the CIA and how the American intelligence system was established during the Second World War. During the war, then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt established the Office of Strategic Services, the first official intelligence arm of the U.S. government. FDR chose as the sole leader of this new department a former classmate from Columbia Law School, an Irish Catholic named William Donovan. Donovan was also known as Wild Bill because of his exploits during World War I. He was given complete authority over the new spy network proposed by the president. Furthermore, Donovan was answerable to no one but FDR. Former Special Forces operator Dino Garner writes that books have been written about Donovan's exploits, a heroic warfighter and the architect and driving force behind the OSS. What those books don't share is that Donovan was a well-trained Irish Jesuit who played dirty at nearly every turn. His tactics and strategies were second to none, simply because the Jesuits use a no-holds-barred approach to fighting their enemies. Carner goes on to say, the guys who wrote Donovan's field manuals were also high-ranking Jesuits who'd been trained in the art of warfare. While the OSS was controversial, some of America's prominent figures served in Donovan's spy network. Perhaps most interesting was Julia Child, the woman made famous for her dynamic cooking show. Yet those who watched her were largely unaware that during the war, she worked as a spy for Donovan and the OSS. With her were men like Catholic film director John Ford, who was famous for his many productions with American icon John Wayne. Ford also served in the OSS. He even created training films for Donovan, including this one, where he appears as an OSS officer.
Now, we'll give you all the dope you require about this El Porto area, but just don't read it. Absorb it.
Okay, if you want to waste time. But I tell you, I know El Porto like a book.
Perhaps the enemy has added a couple of chapters since you've left.
Aye, aye, sir.
The film shows how an overconfident agent can make mistakes. It was just one of many projects Ford produced for the OSS, and shows the connection between the intelligence community and the entertainment industry from the beginning. Other notable agents were men like actor Sterling Hayden, Chicago White Sox player Mo Berg, the historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., and even Henry Ringling North of the Ringling Brothers circus fame. The relationship between Hollywood and the CIA has continued since the time of Donovan, having influenced countless films. As shown by the documentary Theaters of War, How the Pentagon and the CIA Took Hollywood. In the film, Dr. Matthew Alford claims that what we found is that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of products have been affected and are often rewritten at script level by the national security state in the United States. Some believe that Hollywood movies are really a modern version of what was known as Jesuit theater in centuries past, where the order communicated ideas through dramatic plays. The book, Jesuit Hollywood by Sean Wilcock, documents how Jesuits used theater as part of the Counter-Reformation to refute the anti-papist dramas inspired by Martin Luther. Wilcock writes that the Jesuits saw the theater as having a very great purpose in their schemes to promote Jesuit religious propaganda to the masses. Far from being a minor instrument for teaching, the Jesuits incorporated the use of dramas, dance, and opera in their schools and missions around the world. In the 20th century, they were even responsible for creating the official production code for making movies in Hollywood. Also called the Hays Code, after Congressman William Hayes, it was originally intended to prevent immoral practices from being communicated on film. The code was developed by Catholic publisher Martin Quigley, along with a Jesuit priest named the Reverend Daniel Lord. The code was upheld for some 20 years by a Jesuit-educated Catholic named Joseph Breen, who became the central figure associated with the moral boundaries imposed on the film industry. At one point, Breen was even said to have more influence over world opinion than Hitler, Mussolini, or Stalin because of the tremendous power he had over the content of Hollywood movies. But while the code was done away with, the influence of Rome did not cease. It continued through the American deep state. Researchers continue to investigate what sort of covert propaganda the intelligence community has infused and continues to infuse in Hollywood films. The Jesuit influence at the CIA can be seen in a series of clues. For example, the order was originally known as the Company of Jesus, while the company is also one of the names given to the CIA, as shown by the book Inside the Company by former CIA operations officer and whistleblower Philip Agee. In the introduction, he reveals that he joined the CIA, quote, after 4 years of Jesuits and 4 at Notre Dame. It is also reported that the CIA is often called the Catholic Intelligence Agency. Most sources give as the reason for this the influence of OSS founder William Donovan, whose statue is found at the CIA headquarters to this day as part of the OSS Memorial. He continues to be seen as the father of modern American intelligence gathering and the unofficial founder of the CIA. But perhaps the most revealing part of Donovan's history is found in the book, The Last Hero by Anthony Cave Brown, where a black and white photo shows Donovan at the Vatican, beside the Pope's Swiss Guards, to receive the Medal of Saint Sylvester, the Vatican's highest award for a lifetime of public and secret services to the Catholic Church.
While Bill Donovan late in life, he actually received a very high award from the Pope. It's called the Order of Sylvester. So the Pope saw fit to crown his lifetime efforts with this very prestigious award. And that is another important tie-in between the CIA and the Roman Church state.
The liberal magazine Mother Jones published an article on Donovan's relationship with the Vatican titled, "Their Will Be Done." The article shows an illustration with an American politician receiving instructions from a Roman Catholic priest inside a confessional. The obvious suggestion is that the priests control the politicians in a secretive manner. The article further exposes the activities of the historic Knights of Malta, many of whom are members of the CIA. They argue that while the Knights are known for their charitable works, some of their acts included the mass smuggling of some 50,000 Nazi war criminals, who, with the assistance of the International Red Cross, were furnished fake Vatican passports and, in some cases, clerical robes, and were smuggled to South America. Many Nazis were smuggled to Argentina, for centuries known to be a stronghold of the Catholic Church. Cardinal Bergoglio, who became Pope Francis, is a Jesuit from Argentina. In the book, The Secret History of the Jesuits, written by French author Edmond Paris, the connection between the order and Hitler's National Socialist Workers' Party is explained in detail. In his book, Paris even goes so far as to declare that the Vatican was behind both world wars. He writes, "The public is practically unaware of the overwhelming responsibility carried by the Vatican and its Jesuits in the start of the two world wars, a situation which may be explained in part by the gigantic finances at the disposition of the Vatican and its Jesuits, giving them power in so many spheres." Furthermore, Paris documents how it was reported by the French media that Pope Pius XII made Hitler. He came to power not so much through legal means, but because the Pope influenced the Centrum, the German Catholic Party, It was the German Catholic Party, known as the Center Party, that would give to Hitler his absolute power. Before he became Pope, Pius XII was known as Cardinal Pacelli. It was he who had worked for years to initiate the political agreement between the Vatican and Nazi Germany. He had famously signed the Vatican's Concordat in 1933 with Hitler and the Third Reich. Quoting the French media at the time, Edmund Paris writes that the Concordat brought to the National Socialist government, considered nearly everywhere to be made up of usurpers, if not brigands, the seal of an agreement with the oldest international power, the Vatican. In a way, it was the equivalent of a diploma of international honorability.
Their rise to power was based on fraud, deceit, intimidation, and coercion, culminating finally in terror and flame. Into that flame went the democratic constitution of the Weimar Republic and the freedom of the German people.
Edmund Paris also revealed that one of the terms of the Concordat was that the Roman Catholic bishops would need to swear their allegiance to the Nazi government, giving greater credibility to Hitler in the eyes of millions of Catholic citizens. He writes, in July 1933, when the Concordat forced the bishops to swear an oath of allegiance to the Nazi government, the concentration camps were already open. The Vatican was the main force behind the lightning rise of Hitler, who, together with Mussolini and Franco, were but war pawns manipulated by the Vatican and its Jesuits. In 1936, Cardinal Pacelli traveled to America, where he was given an honorary degree by the Jesuits' Fordham University, and then another honorary degree by the Jesuits at Georgetown. The order referred to Pacelli as the Apostle of Peace, yet he was crowned Pope in March of 1939, and within 6 months, World War II began. In his book, The Vatican Against Europe, Edmund Paris would blame the Second World War on the political craftiness of Rome. Paris himself was a French historian, raised by Catholic parents and educated at the Sorbonne, the leading university in Paris. His writings about genocidal events during the war are even preserved by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C.
Who was Edmund Paris, and did Jack Chick know him personally?
Edmund Paris was an unsaved researcher, but his wife was a Christian. And his wife had contact with Chick Publications and Jack. And his wife so believed in what her husband was doing and his researches about the Catholic Church and the Jesuit order, like the secret history of the Jesuits, that she deeded that stuff over. She said, please publish this, and gave permission to Jack to publish it. That's how we got it. Because this Christian wife of this man, and some say, and I cannot prove it because all the people I could ask are no longer here, that he converted just before he died. I sure hope he did, because he sure has made a great contribution in secret history of the Jesuits.
But Edmund Paris confronted not only Rome's influence with Hitler, but also with Nazi allies in Croatia, known as the Ustashi, whose leader was a notorious war criminal named Ante Pavelic. Edmund Paris documented Ustashi crimes in his book, Genocide in Satellite Croatia. Pavelic is seen here, meeting with Adolf Hitler in 1941. The Ustashi were an alliance of Roman Catholics and Bosnian Muslims, who saw the Orthodox Serbian Christians as their enemies. They are perhaps one of the most dreadful companies of genocidal killers in history, whose gruesome murders were said to shock even their Nazi allies.
Yes, well, I have a book, a Time Life book entitled Partisans and Guerrillas. Shows that not just the Jewish people who were persecuted, and it contains really horrific information. It states the Nazis took over Yugoslavia and installed a quote, a vicious homegrown fascist named Ante Pavelic, a longtime advocate of Croatian independence and the founder of a pro-Catholic terrorist organization known as the Ustashi, or rebels. As Hitler's puppet, Pavelic set about eliminating what he called alien elements, Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies. The Serbs comprised approximately 30% of the state of Croatia's population, and nearly all were members of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Pavelic's formula for dealing with the Serbs was simple and brutal. 1/3 were to be expelled to Serbia, 1/3 converted to Catholicism, and 1/3 exterminated. The massacres went on and on. By the time the killing was finally brought to an end, the Ustashi had taken an incredible toll of Serbs, variously estimated at from 350,000 to 750,000.
The supreme apostolic vicar of the Ustashi army was Archbishop Aloysius Stepanak, a Jesuit-educated priest and one of the most controversial figures from the war. Stepanak defined Serbs as renegades from the Catholic Church. He and the Vatican supported the Ustashi movement both during and after the war. He is seen here meeting with Ante Pavelic, whose government was the Croatian parallel to that of Nazi Germany. We read that Pavelic's Ustasha started a reign of terror unprecedented in Balkan history, and in the 4 years killed over 500,000 people. The victims were primarily Serbs in Croatia, as well as Jews and Gypsies. Orthodox Church scholars maintain that Archbishop Stepanak welcomed the religious conversion law of 1941, which obliged the Orthodox Serbs to convert to Roman Catholicism. In fact, this photo, taken from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, shows a group of Serbian civilians who are being forced to convert to Catholicism by the Ustashi. To this day, Orthodox Church historians maintain that Catholic priests, monks, and nuns took the most active part in the genocide of the Orthodox Serbs. Franciscan monks carried out mass executions in the villages of Draculic and Sargovac, where about 2,000 Serbs were slaughtered. This photo shows Ustashi leader Ante Pavelic surrounded by Franciscan monks, who are said to have been some of the worst killers during the genocide. By far the most nefarious was a Franciscan friar named Miroslav Filipovic. He is seen here dressed in his monk's robe on one side, while in his Ustashi uniform on the other. He became the chief guard at the Jasenovac concentration camp and confessed to personally killing at least 100 prisoners.
You already know we have the real
his crimes were
history
done
here
with such wickedness and cruelty that
Make
he
sure
was
to give this a
nicknamed
like and
Fra
follow
Satana,
if you haven't
which
already,
means
guys.
Brother Satan. For his crimes, Filipovic was executed by hanging after the war. In the book, Croatia Under Ante Pavelic by Rob McCormick, the author details the general nature of the atrocities. He says, "The Ustashi reveled in the bloodlust, employing various acts of torture, such as skinning and burning victims alive. Sexual mutilation was widespread and was embraced by the especially wicked. Some Serbs were hacked to pieces with their noses, ears, and tongues cut off.
There's really gruesome details. According to one Italian correspondent, Pavlik once put a wicker basket on his desk filled with 40 pounds of eyes gouged from the victim of the Eustachi. And I comment in my book, during the war, Pope Pius XII met with Pavlik and most assuredly knew what was going on in Yugoslavia. If anyone would have listened to the Pope, wouldn't have been this man who was trying to make his jurisdiction completely Catholic. Why then didn't the Pope tell him to stop the murders, the forced conversions, and other crimes? Was it not because what was going on was nothing new for the papacy and the church?
And of course, when you say the church, you mean the Roman Catholic Church.
The Roman Catholic, yes, that's correct, yeah.
Jasenovac was the most notorious concentration camp in Croatia. In what is called by one author the blackest page of the Eustachi regime, because of the hundreds of thousands who were tortured, raped, and murdered there. 20th century author Avro Manhattan also documented the horrific crimes of Rome's Eustachi. In his book, The Vatican's Holocaust, which is called the sensational account of the most horrifying religious massacre of the 20th century, he writes, "The Vatican was well informed of what was going on inside Eustachi, Croatia, not only because the Catholic hierarchy sent the Pope regular reports, but because the Pope had his own personal representative there. The personal representative of Pope Pius XII was Monsignor Giuseppe Marcone, shown here with Ante Pavelic, and also here, seated next to Archbishop Stepanak. Today, the people of the Republic of Serbia maintain a memorial at Jasenovac, remembering more than 700,000 victims of what is often said to be the most cruel and savage chapter of the Second World War. While Hitler's Holocaust against the Jews has been given the greatest attention, authors like Avro Manhattan and Edmund Paris published their works as a warning to future generations. Especially when, as the war came to an end, the Vatican began to look for ways to help those who committed such terrible crimes escape accountability.
The Roman Catholic system was very deeply involved, and the influence of the Jesuits is more easily seen in World War II. But in both wars, the Vatican backed Germany and certain other powers, the purpose being to take control of Europe and the world, as they had often tried to do in the past and had succeeded in doing in Europe, and wanting to do it again, but using the most powerful nation in Europe at the time, which was Germany. And when that failed in World War I, moving on to preparations for World War II. Hitler, as is played down today, but was a Roman Catholic from Austria, a very Jesuit part of the German nation. He had a lot of influence from them, and Hitler actually pretty much fashioned the Gestapo along Jesuit lines, and that's just some of the evidence. There's a lot more, and of course World War II and the pretty much the Jesuit state of Croatia.
Croatia is predominantly Catholic, but has a large share of Orthodox adherents as well. The Ustashi, Pavelic elite guard, are disintegrating now due to the corruption of their membership and disrepute even in German eyes.
Croatia, which was a Nazi state, but which committed atrocities that at times made the Nazis of Germany look like they were in kindergarten. It was a terrible time, and it was run by a Jesuit, as was Slovakia. So the influence of the Vatican in general, the Jesuits in particular, in these wars is immense.
The Nazi invasion of France is one of the most dramatic events of World War II and would have been a defining influence in the life of Edmund Paris as a French citizen. He would have been familiar with the legendary French resistance that fought valiantly against Nazi tyranny until their country was fully liberated. Many of the quotes from his books are taken from French publications written during or shortly after the war. His writings could even be seen as a continuation of the fight against Nazism by exposing the powers that were behind it. But he was not alone in his analysis of Rome's involvement. Famed author H.G. Wells accused the Pope of supporting Hitler and of only preaching peace once he wanted to help the Nazis escape accountability. Wells said of the Pope, "The pleas he is now making for peace and forgiveness are manifestly designed to assist the escape of these criminals, so that they may presently launch a fresh assault upon all that is decent in humanity." In the Bible, there are many scriptures that warn against accepting a false peace from a dangerous enemy. In the book of Ezekiel, God warned, "Therefore thus saith the Lord God, because ye have spoken vanity and seen lies, therefore behold, I am against you, because, even because, they have seduced my people, saying peace, and there was no peace." Meanwhile, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul warned that the day of the Lord would come as a thief in the night. "For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." The theme of false peace seemed to echo in Europe when Neville Chamberlain famously negotiated with Adolf Hitler, and then returned to England with a peace treaty signed by the Fuhrer.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
The agreement with Hitler would be shattered a short time later at the start of World War II, resulting in the removal of Chamberlain, who was replaced by Winston Churchill. Churchill's uncompromising determination helped to drive the Allied forces during the war.
"We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing ground, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender."
While Churchill's views on God have been debated, it is clear that he saw Protestant England as the historic champion of freedom, fighting against the villain of Romanism. Meanwhile, the evidence of Rome's influence over Hitler and Nazi Germany appears to be undeniable. In the book Hitler Speaks by Hermann Rauschning, the author relates some of the dialogue of Hitler in private conversation. Rauschning claims that Hitler said, quote, I learned above all from the Jesuits. So did Lenin, for that matter, if I remember rightly. There has been nothing more impressive in the world than the hierarchical organization of the Catholic Church. I have taken over many elements of it in the organization of my party. To have lasted almost 2,000 years under changing fortunes is an achievement. Rausning's testimony is important because he was a former member of the Nazi Party who got out before the war began and left Germany. In his book, he warned that Hitler and his movement are the apocalyptic riders of world annihilation. There is also the testimony of Walter Schellenberg, one of the highest-ranking members of the Nazi intelligence network. He described the development of the SS under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, who became its highest-ranking member. He said, "The SS organization had been constituted by Himmler according to the principles of the Jesuit order. Their regulations and the spiritual exercises prescribed by Ignatius of Loyola were the model Himmler tried to copy exactly. The Reichsführer SS, Himmler's title as Supreme Chief of the SS, was to be the equivalent of the Jesuits' general." Hitler himself even said, "I see in Himmler our Ignatius de Loyola." Furthermore, Franz von Papen, the man who oversaw the controversial Concordat between Hitler and the Vatican, declared that the Third Reich is the first world power, which not only acknowledges but also puts into practice the high principles of the papacy.
Durch eure Schule wird die ganze Nation gehen. Und ich weiß, so wie ihr mit stolzer Ergebenheit.
Furthermore, it is generally agreed that the leading symbol of the entire Nazi movement can be traced to Hitler's Roman Catholic education. We read that Adolf Hitler had been a pupil at the school of Lambach and sang amongst the choir boys in the abbey bearing the same name. He discovered the swastika there, as it was the heraldic sign of Father Hagen, the abbey's administrator. The abbot, Theodoric Hagen, was a 19th century priest who had long since passed away before Hitler attended the school at Lambach Abbey. Yet he left behind his coat of arms, which is said to have captivated the young Adolf. We see the image here with the bishop's mitre, placed like a crown above the emblem. The letters around the symbol stand for Theodoric Hagen, Abbey Lambach. Some of the Nazi connections to Rome are still subjects for debate. According to Edmund Paris, Heinrich Himmler's uncle was said to be a Jesuit and also a leading member of the SS. Yet records of his uncle's history have proven difficult to find. Another Catholic priest, named Father Bernhard Stempfel, was reportedly the ghostwriter for Hitler's famous work, Mein Kampf, as was reported by a former Nazi named Otto Strasser. According to Edmund Paris, Stempfel, pictured here with Adolf Hitler, was a Jesuit, but if so, he was secretly, since he was a priest of a different order. Dr. Ronald Cook believes that Hitler's Mein Kampf was related to the Jesuit struggle against the great Protestant leader, Otto von Bismarck, in the 19th century. It was Bismarck who expelled the Jesuits from Germany in the year 1872.
Yes, the Kulturkampf was started there in Bismarck's Germany in the middle of the 19th century. And Bismarck opposed Rome. And of course, Bismarck referred to Canossa, where the Pope had put his foot.
I had found this about a year ago and saved it I figured it'd be a good one to watch tonight. And then
ruler of the world way back in
the guy that just said he
11th
came from
century.
YouTube, he recommended me another
In the
one,
year
which maybe we'll watch
1077
tomorrow
AD, the
by
Holy
the same
Roman
people who made
Emperor
this
Henry
one.
IV
So
arrived
yeah, I
at the
just
fortress
find them.
at
A lot of them I
Canossa
found on
Castle
X,
in
some on
northern
BitChute,
Italy
on Rumble.
to ask the forgiveness
I
of Pope
collect
Gregory
them and
VII,
download them.
who had excommunicated him from the church. Henry was famously humiliated, being made to wait for 3 days while standing barefoot in the snow before he was forgiven. Bismarck's reference to this was, "We will not go to Canossa," signifying that he refused to submit to papal authority. His famous words are even recorded in German on one of the monuments dedicated to his memory.
In other words, he had no appetite for humble pie. So the Jesuits then led their culture Kampf, and Hitler wrote his book Mein Kampf, My Struggle. So the cultural Kampf is the cultural struggle that the Jesuits set forth in Germany.
In the year 1940, Otto Strasser published the book Hitler and I, in which he wrote that Father Stempfel had twice revised the entire manuscript of Mein Kampf. Furthermore, he said that Stempfel's changes to Hitler's original work eventually brought about his demise. He wrote, "Good Father Stempfel, a priest of great learning, editor of a paper at Miesbach, spent months rewriting and editing Mein Kampf. He eliminated the more flagrant inaccuracies and the excessively childish platitudes. Hitler never forgave Father Stempfel for getting to know his weaknesses so well. He had him murdered by a special death squad on the night of June 30th, 1934. June 30th was the infamous Night of Long Knives, when Hitler got rid of his rivals within the Nazi Party. While there were many players in the drama of the Second World War, some researchers argue that the conflict was being driven behind the scenes by the Superior General of the Jesuit Order, a man known as Vladimir Ledichowski, who could be called Hitler's Black Pope. It was Ledichowski who assigned a Jesuit to Benito Mussolini in Italy, a priest named Taci Venturi, Mussolini's Jesuit.
In cui Roma aveva Cesare, Virgilio ed Augusto.
The Jesuit Venturi was one of the architects of the Lateran Treaty of 1929, which restored the temporal power of the Pope by recognizing Vatican City as a nation-state. It preceded the Vatican's Concordat with Germany in 1933. Mussolini was called the first of the dictators, the founder of modern fascism, who greatly influenced Adolf Hitler. The Italian black shirts were the inspiration for Hitler's brown shirts later on, while Mussolini's title, Il Duce, which means the leader, was the model for Hitler's title as the Führer. It was Germany and Italy together that invaded Yugoslavia and established the Ustashi under Ante Pavelic, under the supervision of the Jesuit-trained Archbishop Stepanak. Meanwhile, it would appear that Hitler's Jesuit was the Superior General himself. According to the book, The Secret Front, by German author Walter Hagen, it was Ledichowski who allied the Jesuit order with the German Secret Service. Edmund Paris says that as a result, many Catholic priests began to wear the black uniforms of the Nazi SS. American author F. Tupper Saucy documented his own history of the Jesuits in the book Rulers of Evil. He writes that during
I want to just say, I literally today just put out an article on my site on that book, Rulers of Evil. It's kind of one of the reasons I decided to play this documentary, theofficialurban.substack.com. Henry McCow actually featured that on his website, so it's free. It's also got the audio deep dive on my Spotify listing, Urban Odyssey. So check that out. It's a pretty good read. I'll probably plug that again before I get off here.
In World War II, the focus of Catholic action politically was based on Black Pope Vladimir Ledachowski's strategy of bringing Catholic nations of Central and Eastern Europe together into a pan-German federation. To head the federation, he says, Ledachowski required a charismatic leader charged with subduing the communistic Soviet Union on the east, Protestant Prussia, Protestant Great Britain, and Republican France on the west. Ledachowski chose the Catholic militarist Adolf Hitler. In print, Ledachowski's Pan-German Manifesto took the form of Hitler's autobiographical Mein Kampf, My Struggle, ghostwritten by the Jesuit Father Stempfel and placed beside the Bible on the altars of German churches. Like Edmund Paris, Saucy believed that Bernhard Stempfel was a Jesuit. Meanwhile, Edmund Paris says, in fact, it was the Ledachowski plan, adapted to the needs of the time, which the Führer was trying to realize under the patronage of the Holy See.
Heute Tag hat sich an Woche und Woche steigend unsere Jacke zum Symbol des deutschen Volkes und Reiches erhoben. Sieg! Sieg!
Rome's support of Hitler was also acknowledged by a variety of additional sources during the war era. The Protestant Truth Society published a work titled The Vatican and Nazism, in which they openly declared that the one organization which has been the means of placing Hitler in power and has assisted him in his conquests is the Roman Catholic Church, whose headquarters are at the Vatican in Rome. The evidence, we believe, is overwhelming. Another work, titled Behind the Dictators, by a former Catholic priest named Leo Lehmann, who converted to the Protestant faith, shows the relationship of Mussolini and Hitler with the powers of Rome. Lehmann writes, the Jesuit order, as the leader of Catholic action, has played a decisive role. We can even go so far as to state that Nazi fascism had its origin in the Society of Jesus, and that, like other movements in the past analogous to fascism, it was planned to serve the traditional aims of the disciples of Ignatius Loyola. He went on to say that the defenders of democratic ideology will not be victorious until they come out openly against their real enemy, the Knights of the Black Crusade, by which he meant the Jesuit order. Dr. Ronald Cook quotes the writings of a former Jesuit priest named Malachi Martin, who described how Jesuits were commonly defined prior to the 20th century.
Webster's Third International Dictionary gives the meaning of a Jesuit as a member of the order, then supplies the negative meanings. One given to intrigue or equivocation, a crafty person, terms that are amplified by Dorsel's dictionary, two-faced, false, insidious, dissembling, perfidious, insincere, dishonorable, dishonest, untruthful. A French proverb states, wherever two Jesuits come together, the devil always makes three.
It was Rome who, in the Dark Age, established Jewish ghettos and forced the Jewish people to wear the yellow badge of shame. But in the 20th century, the Jesuits would take anti-Semitism to even greater extremes. It was the Black Pope, Ledachowski, and the Jesuit order that fomented the political hatred against the Jewish people and insisted that they be racially linked to communism. In the book, The Pope and Mussolini, Pulitzer Prize-winning author David Kurtzer described Ledachowski as a virulent anti-Semite, kindly disposed toward fascism, a man Mussolini looked to for help. We read that the Jesuit magazine La Civiltà Cattolica had warned that Jews were the evil force behind a dangerous conspiracy. They were said to be the secret masters of both communism and capitalism, all aimed at enslaving Christians. Among the most influential Vatican figures pushing this conspiracy theory was Ledachowski, head of the Jesuit order. The groundwork of anti-Jewish propaganda was being prepared during the time of Pope Pius XI, who was compelled by the Black Pope to condemn communism. When the Pope prepared certain statements against communism, Kurtzer writes, quote, "Unhappy that they said nothing about the Jews, Ledachowski kept pushing the Pope to add language linking them to the communist danger." In their writings, the Jesuits...
Really what you have here with the whole debate in the way that I gather, here, let me make it so you can see me. What I gather from this whole thing is it's the two wings of the same bird. You've got Jewish communism, which is fair, and then you have fascism, which is what it's kind of showing you here, is that you have one side, which was, Russian communism, where they murdered the Tsar, that whole thing. And then you have fascism going on in Italy and Germany and Croatia and the like. And so really you just got kind of a controlled conflict, it seems like. The extent, I don't know what the full extent is. I was listening to Henry Mackau, and one of the rare interviews he did. Really, truly, you got to understand there are a lot of good Jewish people who are taking the blame for the Talmudic Kabbalist sect, the Jewish superiority, the people who say, if you don't believe Jews are God, then you've got to die. So these doomsday Jews, these Talmudic Jews, are scapegoating, as the Bible says, the synagogue of Satan, are scapegoating the vast majority of good Jewish people. But no, yeah, you're absolutely right. It was very much pagan in Germany at that time, and the books they were burning were on gender theory and shit like that. So very true. And today, at the end of the day, the way that I almost see it is that the Democrats are your communists, but the way it's looking, and I say this having voted for Trump, it's looking like it's always been. I mean, the Republicans are leaning into this whole fascism narrative. I mean, look at it for what it is. It's a narrative that they're playing into, but they are embracing it. I mean, they have no issue with it. I mean, this is very much the same thing again. You've got the Democratic communists, you got the Republican fascist leaning. It's just the same thing that's went on in World War I, same thing that went on in World War II. That's what Albert Pike said in his plan, 1876 or something like that. So that's really all I know. I mean, I can't propose to know the full extent of it, but that's at least to the best of my my research. That's what it looks like. Yeah, the Palantir switcheroo, isn't that fucking? It's a mess. I just put out a thing on that big beautiful bill too. I did a deep dive on it, so if you guys want to know what's actually in it, that's also on my site. You can listen to that one too if you want. It's a mess. I might do a show on that. I really might do like a half an episode or something, because I don't really want to. That's just so much legalese that I don't even understand half of it. But I tried to boil it down as much as I could into English from legalese. So hopefully it's enough for people to at least understand that there's a lot of issues with it that they need to at least know about. Half of Congress didn't even read the bill, which I don't blame them. It's 1,000 pages, but I mean, who would you expect to read it? Probably would be Congress. But I plugged it into Notebook LM. Yeah, how do you connect with me? bio.link/officialurban. Here, I'll put that up for just a minute so you guys can. One second. Here we go. There we go. Got you right there. That's those are my websites. You guys can take those down, and I'll leave that up for a minute, and I'll get rid of it in a minute once you guys have it down.
Had been pushing anti-Jewish propaganda since the 19th century. As this cover of La Civiltà Cattolica shows, from the year 1890, with the heading, The Jewish Question in Europe. The publication mentions causes, effects, and then remedies, or solutions, which would appear to foreshadow Hitler's final solution program, which resulted in the Holocaust. The magazine presents arguments concerning the financial domination of the Jewish people, even referencing a book called The Desperate Struggle Between the Aryan People and Judaism. But in 1890, Adolf Hitler, who was born in 1889, was not more than a year old, showing that the ideas that drove the Nazi movement were developed by the Jesuit order nearly half a century before Hitler's rise to power. The Nazi method of blitzkrieg warfare overwhelmed many of the nations of Europe. Yet with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the tables would turn dramatically.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific.
Just as Hitler and Mussolini signed a peace treaty before betraying England, so the Japanese talked peace with America, up to the very hour of the Pearl Harbor attack.
A day of infamy. Even as Japanese diplomats were conferring with Secretary of State Hull on peace measures, Nipponese planes were swooping down on Pearl Harbor. This pictorial record includes both U.S. films and pictures made by the enemy as they dropped their load of death on the naval base, on Wheeler Field, on civilian homes and schools.
As King David had written in the Psalm, the words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. Japan had joined the Axis powers and its plan for world domination 1 year earlier through the Tripartite Act of 1940.
In Berlin, they drew up the Axis Act, the blueprint of the new order, and parceled out the continents of the world for Axis domination. Italy was to get the Mediterranean. Japan was to get the Orient, and to Germany would go the rest of the world.
Here, I've got one more little bit of nugget of information for you. The Hail Hitler salute they're doing, there's a funny story behind that. So Sieg Heil means Hail Victory, but the word victory actually goes back to the old motif of the rising sun. Hail the rising sun, that's what that means. Sieg Heil, hail the rising sun. So the dawn of a new day, the better tomorrow, the golden age, they're calling it now. Chuck calls it a golden age, it's the same thing. It's the same symbol. They all, that's why Japan, their flag was the rising sun. So the Hitler salute is homage to when the Egyptian priests would wake up in the morning with the morning wood. They would go out and they would flash to the rising sun. And so when they're all sticking their arms up like that, it's a homage to that, to the erect phallus. So I just laugh at it, but yeah, that's what that means. They're all, bunch of old men that go around building obelisk dick statues. It's just stupid shit.
Despite their grand globalist plans, once America entered the war, it was simply a matter of time before Hitler and the Axis powers would be defeated.
With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
According to Edmund Paris, this was what the Black Pope had feared. The Jesuits had worked through propaganda to convince the United States to stay out of the war. At least one Jesuit agent was said to be a Catholic priest and national figure named Father Charles Coughlin. Coughlin had a huge following through his radio broadcast. Known for his anti-Jewish rhetoric, he also supported both Hitler and Mussolini. Paris believed it was Coughlin's assignment to convince Americans not to enter the Second World War, helping to ensure a Nazi victory.
May I remind our President with all due respect that not one of these soldiers cast a ballot on that fateful Good Friday night in the spring of 1917, the nation like ours to take up arms for the profiteers and the exploiters of mankind.
In spite of Coughlin's efforts, America entered the war in defense of England and the cause of freedom. The Black Pope, Ledachowski's dream, would not be realized. Edmund Paris writes that Ledachowski already spoke haughtily about the general meeting the company would hold in Rome after England had capitulated.
Despite the propaganda and confusion of recent months, it is now obvious that England is losing the war.
But heaven had decided otherwise, Paris says. Great Britain braced herself against the enemy. The United States entered the war, and the Russian campaign was a disaster for the Nazis. For Ledachowski, it was the collapse of his great dream. The general's health did not stand up to such a disaster, and he died. In fact, Vladimir Ledachowski, the Black Pope, would die in December of 1942, just over a year after the United States declared war on Japan, Germany, and the Axis powers. When the war was over, the Vatican called upon its faithful servants in both England and America to help many of the Nazis escape trial and punishment. Donovan's OSS would play a key role in developing what was called the Vatican Rat Lines. The Rat Lines helped thousands of Nazi war criminals escape accountability, including such notorious figures as Klaus Barbie, Dr. Joseph Mengele, Adolf Eichmann, and Hitler's Ustashi leader, Ante Pavlovich.
Well, you can't talk about the Jesuits operating in the world today without talking about the most famous Jesuit on the planet right now, which is Pope Francis. Pope Francis goes around talking about, you need to share more of your wealth with these people. You need to open up your borders. Everything that's in the United States, everyone in the world is entitled to, and you should open the borders and let them in. I found it quite ironic that Pope Francis, from behind the walls of the Vatican, can talk about how wrong it is to build a wall at the southern border in America. It's because he sees all the wealth in America as common property, which is Marxist.
In 2019, the Jesuits' America magazine published an article titled "The Catholic Case for Communism." It featured a photo of Pope Francis with the president of Bolivia presenting a crucifix made from a hammer and sickle, the traditional emblems of Marxism. The design was the work of a Jesuit priest named Luis Espinal, a Jesuit filmmaker and activist who was reportedly killed by a government death squad in 1980. A fellow Jesuit named Javier Albo would later declare that Espinal's intent was for the Church to be in dialogue with Marxism. There is no question that such dialogue has long since begun.
Pope Francis is one of the biggest advocates on the world stage for Marxism, and he finds the capitalist system reprehensible.
But where did this association begin? Many believe the Pope and Vatican have just recently embraced Marxist ideas. But one of the most notorious communists in history, Fidel Castro, was Jesuit trained and educated in 3 Jesuit institutions. Furthermore, the former Jesuit general, Pedro Arrupe, openly declared that the Jesuits were proud of Fidel Castro. As Argentine journalist and politician Norma Morandini writes, Fidel Castro never ceased being a Jesuit, instead adapting the religious and moral matrix of this Catholic order to Marxism, Leninism, and causing endless confusion to the Soviets. This is the theory behind Fidel Castro, the Last Catholic King, a book published by the Italian historian Loris Zanatta. Loris Zanatta is a professor at the University of Bologna. His book on Castro is further described by an Italian website. We read of Castro that, like the Catholic kings, he fuses politics and religion, coming to conceive of a political religion, a community of faith, inclusive towards the faithful, ruthless with heretics. And his enemies are the same as those of Catholic Spain, Protestant civilization, and the Enlightenment, now renamed capitalism and liberalism. In other words, Zanatta seems to argue that capitalism is simply a Jesuit code word for Protestant forms of government.
I think it comes down to a foundational principle, and that is that if you believe that truth ultimately rests in the mouth and the words and actions of a single man, as in Roman Catholicism, then you're going to be attracted to a government and economic system that is basically dictatorial. One person who just declares what the law is, declares what the truth is, and he's to be obeyed. And that's why you find that Roman Catholic countries, say Honduras and Venezuela, and they tend toward Marxist, socialist, dictatorial regimes. Whereas the Protestant foundational principle is that you have to have a document that specifies exactly what we're all going to do, what we all agree to, which is why Protestant countries tend to result in constitutional republics, because they say lex is rex, the law is king, and whereas dictatorial republics or monarchies would say the king is the law. Well, Roman Catholics, because of their epistemology and their belief that the Pope is infallible and that truth comes from the church and not from the scriptures, are going to tend toward economic and political systems that center on a man or an organization to determine what is true. Whereas constitutional republics are going to, of course, rely on what's written down and agreed to. Constitutional republics can fail and monarchies can be nice, but that is why you end up with, Protestants tend to favor the constitutional written documents, whereas the Catholics would tend toward Marxist dictatorial regimes.
But to understand more fully the role of the Jesuits in the development of communism, we must go back to its point of origin in the 19th century. It is well known that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto in the year 1848. What is not so well known is that just 5 years earlier, in 1843, a Jesuit priest named Luigi Tapparelli published his own work in which he coined the phrase social justice. The official title of his work was Theoretical Treatise of Natural Right Based on Fact. Yet he admitted that he based his ideas on a desire to revive the earlier teachings of Thomas Aquinas.
But yes, this goes back to Thomas Aquinas. And of course, Thomas is the doctor of the Roman Catholic Church. So he's the person all these Jesuits nowadays, they look back to, and they draw upon Thomas Aquinas.
Thomas Aquinas taught the doctrine of justifiable theft, the idea that it is okay to steal from your neighbor as long as you steal for a good reason. It was this concept that was cleverly interwoven by Tapparelli into his teachings on social justice.
One of the things when you read about social justice, one of the principal concepts behind social justice is redistribution. And it could be redistribution of wealth is a big part of it. And that ties in, of course, very closely with the idea of the welfare state, with the idea of the universal destination of all goods. Because people will say, oh, well, you have all these supposedly surplus goods, but these other people over here, they need those goods. And so we're going to get the government to come, and we're going to take that from you and give it to these other people. And this is called social justice.
Aquinas wrote extensively on the idea of justifiable theft, examining various ways in which a person might steal from their neighbor without it being a sin. He wrote, "It is not theft, properly speaking, to take secretly and use another's property in case of extreme need, because that which he takes for the support of his life becomes his own property by reason of that need. In case of a like need, a man may also take secretly another's property in order to succor his neighbor in need." Furthermore, Aquinas taught that unbelievers had no right to property at all. He said, "Now the things which unbelievers have are not theirs. For Augustine says, 'You falsely call things your own, for you do not possess them justly, and according to the laws of earthly kings, you are commanded to forfeit them. Therefore, it seems that one may lawfully rob unbelievers.'" It is important to remember that within the papal context, an unbeliever is anyone who does not submit to the Pope. Yet the unbelievers are not the only ones who can have their private property taken away.
They have this idea in the Roman Catholic Church, and you can even find this in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I mean, this is very official Roman Catholic doctrine. It's a concept called the universal destination of goods, or sometimes it's called the universal destination of all goods. And to give you just maybe a very short version of what that means, is Rome is willing to tolerate private property up to a point. They say it's kind of a convention in their mind. They call it part of positive law. It's kind of a man-made convention. And they say, okay, we're fine with you owning things up to a point. But when push comes to shove, if somebody, quote, needs something, well, they have the right to take it from you. They have the right to take your property. And of course, if you're not willing to give that property over, of course, what Rome says is they can get the government to come and take your property. If you didn't have the universal destination of goods, you couldn't have justifiable theft. The universal destination of goods is fundamental to that concept.
One of Tapparelli's students was Vincenzo Pecci, who would later become Pope Leo XIII. In 1891, Leo published his encyclical, Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the working classes, which has been called the Magna Carta of Catholic social teaching in modern times. In the book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania, Dr. John Robbins examined the economic and political worldview of what he called the Roman Church state. He said the following about Rerum Novarum, quote, "The encyclical's Marxism is so blatant that one Roman Catholic writer declared that much of the encyclical appeared only to repeat in more orthodox language what Marx had said 10 years before. 10 years before the Pope's encyclical, Marx had published Das Kapital."
And in that encyclical, the Pope used a lot of very communistic sounding language. And in fact, it was kind of interesting the way John Robbins described it. He said that there are whole paragraphs of that encyclical that could have been lifted out of the Communist Manifesto. For instance, one of the things that Pope Leo would talk about is he would talk about wages as a type of slavery. Well, wage slavery is something that you see in communist literature. They talk about wage slavery. And he wasn't the only pope to speak that way, especially to critique capitalism in that way. They call it a system of wage slavery. So Marx and the popes both agree, that capitalism is a system of wage slavery. So there are some things, there's some elements of communism that Rome likes.
Yet the connection between the Jesuits and socialism runs deeper still. In 1879, we learn that the great Protestant leader, Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany, began publishing in the newspapers his belief that Karl Marx himself was working with the Jesuit general at the time, a man named Peter Jan Becks, a Belgian Jesuit who spent more than 30 years as the Black Pope. Marx revealed the controversy in an interview with the Chicago Tribune, where he said, "For 2 months, Bismarck complained in his North German Gazette that I was in league with Father Beck, the leader of the Jesuit movement, and that we were keeping the socialist movement in such a condition that he could do nothing about it." While Marx claims to be amused by the idea, he does not deny it. Bismarck expelled the Jesuits from Germany earlier in 1872, and he remained a relentless opponent of both the Jesuits and socialism throughout his lifetime. But there were additional warnings back in the 19th century, long before the Marxist revolutions of the 20th century. In the year 1868, the great Protestant historian J.A. Wiley wrote his book, The Seventh Vial, or the Past and Present of Papal Europe. In it he says, "If ever heaven in his wrath sent an incarnation of malignity from the place of all evil to chastise the guilty race of man, it is communism. But the hell from which it has come is Rome. Communism has drawn its birth from the fetid womb of popery, whose superstition has passed into atheism and whose tyranny has engendered lawlessness." Meanwhile, some years earlier, the Reverend Alexander Hislop, well known for his anti-papal work, The Two Babylons, also published another book titled The Red Republic, or Scarlet-Colored Beast of the Apocalypse. In the year 1849, he wrote, "This new phase of socialism will not escape the piercing eye of Rome, and if she finds it necessary or for her interest to pay court to the men of the Red Republic, she will not hesitate for a moment what to do." Popery in its first phase was baptized paganism. In its last, it seems destined to appear as baptized atheism. Another minister named Robert William Dibdin published a work titled England Warned and Counseled in 1851. He wrote, "The writings of the socialists. I maintain there is more than mere wickedness. There is more than mere delusion. There is more than mere fanaticism in these things. There is very much of anti-Christian system, which I trace to the Jesuits." The whole mass of socialists are not Jesuits, of course, but it does not take more than 2 or 3 masterminds to govern all the rest. Alexander Hislop saw the rise of communism in the 19th century as the beginning of the prophetic warnings in the book of Revelation of a scarlet-colored beast. To him, the Red Republic and the Scarlet Beast were the same. Furthermore, he believed that the harlot that rides or controls the beast is ultimately Rome. The red flag of the Marxist is said to date back to the French Revolution. But the doctrines that inspired that revolution are commonly traced to the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, which was a well-known haven of the Jesuit order. It was Jesuit priests at Ingolstadt that trained and educated Adam Weishaupt, the man most often blamed for instigating the French Revolution. Was it merely coincidence that the red flags of the French revolutionaries would be converted to the flags of socialism and communism in the next century? or that the red flag of the Marxists continues to be a symbol of rebellion against God and the rule of law even today. In the year 1916, the warnings continued with an anonymous author who wrote under the name Watchman. He argued that the relationship between the Jesuits and socialism was proved by the revelations of the German ex-Jesuit von Hoensbroek, who left the society because he found that the Jesuits in Germany were the chief leaders and fomenters of socialism in that country. The man in question was a prominent Catholic from a noble German family, Count Paul von Hoensbroek, who joined the Jesuit order as a young man, and upon leaving the society, published his work titled 14 Years a Jesuit. His writings were also noted by former nun M.F. Cusack, who wrote that von Hoensbroek left the Jesuit Society in 1889 because he found that the Jesuits in Germany were engaged in promoting socialism. He has written several pamphlets on the subject, and it is said that in consequence of this, he lives in fear of his life and has to go into hiding. The author called Watchman continued saying, "Socialism as it exists today is in the main a Jesuit organization for fomenting the great revolution which it is their object to bring about in every country." The writings of Thomas Aquinas and Luigi Tapparelli would also influence the development of another branch of Marxist thinking, liberation theology, developed by a Jesuit-trained Dominican priest named Gustavo Gutierrez, who sought to blend Marxism and Christianity into one.
Gutierrez was a Peruvian Jesuit who wrote the first real standard work on liberation theology, and he got put in later as a professor at Notre Dame here in America. So the Jesuits were certainly, and Malachi Martin puts them out more or less as the originators of liberation theology, and many others got into that because it was all talking about revolution. And then now Jesus suddenly became a revolutionary, the first revolutionary. And so you got all that all through evangelicalism there. But it really was all basically Jesuit. And the idea of liberation theology, as I understand it anyway, is that, because a lot of people equate it with fighting and revolution, but that really is the last part. Because liberation theology is supposed to be a message to bring in the kingdom of God on earth. And so I tried to win you to that as a Jesuit teacher or preacher, and I try to convince you, and if I can't convince you, I try to kind of coerce you, and if I can't coerce you, then I just have to get rid of you.
At the conclusion of World War II, French leader Charles de Gaulle and Winston Churchill both declared that their nations had reached the end of a second 30 Years' War. The first 30 Years' War was when Jesuits and their Catholic League attempted to annihilate the Protestant movement throughout Europe. The bloody conflict eventually saw the deaths of some 8 million people, but eventually the Protestant cause prevailed, resulting in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648.
In short, what the Peace of Westphalia is, it was a treaty. It was the treaty that settled the 30 years of war. The basic idea of the Westphalian world order, it created the modern system of international relations. And one of the most important concepts there is the idea of national sovereignty. That is, that individual nation states, that they have sovereignty, they have control over their own territory and over their own internal affairs. So, you can run your country the way you want to run your country. And Rome can't interfere in that and say, well, you can't do those things.
As we have about 5 minutes left in this documentary, I want to thank everybody who's sat with me through this whole thing. It's been a long one. I didn't know if I was going to split it up or just go for it, but for everyone who stuck with me through it, I appreciate it. Thank you for enjoying the movie with me. I hope everybody checks out my site. I put out some good stuff on there. That book, Rulers of Evil, that's out. I got Fire in the Minds of Men. That's a 3-part series. It's going to be coming out. For people who want to support me, you don't have to. Like 80% of the content I put out is free. If you do decide to support me with like $5 a month, you get access to an extended section of notes on some of the posts, but don't feel compelled to if you are not able to, or if you don't want to, that's fine. It's optional. I try to give out most of my stuff for free. What you can do to help me is just, like my posts, like this channel, follow this channel. It helps Carner out. It helps me out in relation. And I'll be with you guys for the next few days. I think he'll be back Saturday or Sunday, but
of a Roman Catholic, I believe.
I just wanted to plug myself and thank you guys.
Yet Rome not only opened the borders of nations, but also of the world religions. Through Vatican Council II, the Jesuits in particular removed the doctrinal boundaries between Christianity and the pagan religions of the world. In particular, the Jesuits said of Islam that the plan of salvation also includes those who acknowledge the Creator, in the first place among whom are the Muslims. Together with us, they adore the one merciful God. Critics of Rome argue that Vatican II is a complete betrayal of the true gospel of Christ.
The Bible says if a man doesn't preach the gospel, it says let him be accursed. Twice it says that, so that you make sure that the Holy Spirit makes sure that you get that. And Paul includes himself, so he's not just railing at other people. If we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel, let him be accursed.
Is the false gospel of ecumenism bringing a curse upon America and the world? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He said, and this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent.
The only answer is Christ and his gospel. That's the only answer to society's ailments and problems, to politics and education. The only answer is the Lord Jesus Christ and his gospel. That's the antidote.
Guys, I want to thank you again. It's been a good night. So, with that, guys, I'm going to... Let's see, hold up. Here I am. With that, guys, I want to sign off and wish you all a good night. So, thanks, guys. I'll see you again tomorrow.